Good morning. Today is Monday, the 25th of November. It is Thanksgiving is nigh, I have to say. And as you know, Pastor Gene, Thanksgiving is my favorite holiday because all the pies come out. You know, pecan pies, apple pies.
Did anybody go to that pie place that you recommended?
Yes. Scrumptious. We did. We went.
No, besides us.
Oh, besides us? No one really asked. I was a little disappointed by that.
Okay. It's too far. Plus, you have to pay tolls.
Oh, you're giving away the location, though.
You told them.
I never told anybody.
No, you said Noble Pies.
I never said no. Oh, beep. I never said that.
What?
No, I said, let me know if you want to know. I never told them what it was, though.
Why are you gatekeeping?
No, I just want people to put forth some effort and ask. But it's a delicious pie place. Pastor Eugene and I went, along with Junsuk, actually, and another member of our podcast team, and we were delighted by the apple pie there. I guess upstate New York has good apples, huh?
I don't know.
No bad apples here. But it was delicious. If you'd like to know the secret pie space. What's your favorite pie, by the way? Apple pie? No a la mode? Not la mode?
Good apple pie.
Yeah.
I think I could have done without the oats, but it was pretty good.
Yeah, I love pecan, blueberry, apple. What's your favorite Thanksgiving food, by the way? Besides
This is
apple
why
pie.
people have to skip the intro. You
No,
know that,
this
right?
is unskippable. This is the best part. Speaking of Thanksgiving, this morning we will be discussing the history of Thanksgiving, and I guess not more importantly, but how we apply this truth. How Christians are to think about Thanksgiving. Does this mean we shouldn't celebrate? Does this mean that we should celebrate harder? What does this mean? We'll discuss all of that and a little bit of Q&A as well this morning on the Dear Church podcast. Welcome to the Dear Church podcast, where we exist to fill your ears and your minds with the study of God to see the world as disciples of Christ. My name is Sam Yang, and we have with us Pastor Eugene and Junsuk and Brian. Today we're talking about Thanksgiving and how Christians are to react to Thanksgiving, how Christians are to celebrate Thanksgiving. And the reason why I bring this up is because I think as of late, there has been a lot of criticism on Thanksgiving. The more wokeism has grown, I guess you could say. A lot of people have started questioning a lot of the holidays that we celebrate. So I remember even Columbus Day became Indigenous Peoples Day. Christmas vacation became winter break for schools. There's a lot of changes that are happening that may seem like they're small, that may seem like they're subtle, but it's actually a big agenda that is at play, the agenda of wokeism. And so we're going to be talking about Thanksgiving this morning. Pastor Eugene, any words before we start? Because I think I have a lot of history to go over.
Well, people just roll their eyes. Like,
Who?
these guys and their anti-woke
Yeah, I
nonsense.
hate them.
Yeah.
They're so handsome. I hate them. Have you ever heard somebody say, "You're so handsome and I hate you because of that"?
I guess you have.
No, I'm not known for that.
I think for Brian, yeah, somebody said that to Brian.
No, it's probably something else.
I think they say he danced so good, I hate him.
Oh, I can see that. Envy could be at play there.
Yeah.
I can see that.
You know when he first danced for our church at a
Yeah.
retreat?
Yeah.
Like people looked back at me.
Like, yo, what in the world? Who did you hire? Who is this?
Yeah.
Who's this Jabberwocky? He is phenomenal at dancing, actually, though.
Yeah, he was really good.
Yeah, he has very good body
I could
control.
honestly say, I mean, he has a style. Everybody has their own style, and they're
It's
good
not
at
my
what
style.
they're good at.
Yeah.
But he is really good at his style of
Yeah.
dance.
So this morning, I want to just quickly go over the history of Thanksgiving. And this is stuff that we've all learned, I think, throughout elementary school, but just as a refresher. So Thanksgiving is modeled after the 1621 harvest feast that was celebrated by the Pilgrims of Plymouth Rock and the Wampanoag people. Wampanoag people. So this is from Britannica, which in Latin means Britain. So this is from Britain. Which is weird because why are they writing about us? First of all, we beat you.
It's just an encyclopedia.
I don't like it though. We beat them. Why are they writing about us? So this is 1621. This harvest feast between the Pilgrims of Plymouth Rock and the Wampanoag people. Few colonists went out fowling, possibly for turkeys, but more probably for geese and ducks, which are easier to catch. 90 or so Wampanoag Native Americans made a surprise appearance at the settlement's gate. The next few days, the two groups socialized without incident. The Wampanoag contributed venison. Men fired guns. Sounds like a good time. Ran races, drank liquor. Struggling to speak in broken English and Wampanoag, they sealed a treaty between the two groups until King Philip's War in 1675. So from that point on, this is still according to Britannica, New England colonists regularly celebrated Thanksgiving. It was a days of prayer thanking God. And on October 3rd, 1863, during the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln proclaimed a national day of Thanksgiving to be celebrated on Thursday, November 26th. Which is not the date that we were celebrating it this year. And there's a reason for that. Following this national Thanksgiving, there were some conflicts with the date. In following years, presidents generally proclaimed the day and the date until FDR. Franklin D. Roosevelt, in efforts to boost the economy by extending the Christmas shopping season 1 week, wanted to move the holiday officially to the third week of November. But with the joint resolution of Congress in 1941, FDR in the year 1942 designated Thanksgiving to be the fourth Thursday in November. And that is why we celebrate Thanksgiving on the fourth Thursday. So it might seem random. You know, other holidays have specified dates like Christmas, July 4th. It's literally the 4th of July, but not Thanksgiving or Easter, which is interesting. But that's why Thanksgiving is the fourth Thursday of November. A little fun fact. First Thanksgiving Day football game began in 1876, which is a big part of our tradition today. Yale versus Princeton. And in the late 1800s, parades became common. The famous Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, which is here right in New York City, began in 1924 and has continued since then. So, again, that's just kind of a very, very brief history of Thanksgiving, the day that we celebrate the fourth Thursday of November. But again, the accusation that many people may have is that Americans have taught only one side of the story. The perspective is that from that of the European colonists. And so we need to know what is dubbed the quote-unquote real history of Thanksgiving. According to one account, Thanksgiving is a day of mourning and protest since it commemorates the arrival of settlers in North America and the centuries of oppression and genocide that followed. There's actually a sign up, and I don't know if you could find a picture of this, Brian. There's a sign up in Coles Hill of Plymouth, Massachusetts. They have a sign up regarding a national day of mourning. And it reads, since 1970, Native Americans have gathered at noon on Coles Hill in Plymouth to commemorate a national day of mourning on the U.S. Thanksgiving holiday. Many Native Americans do not celebrate the arrival of the Pilgrims and other European settlers. To them, Thanksgiving Day is a reminder of the genocide of millions of their people, the theft of their lands, and the relentless assault on their culture. Participants in National Day of Mourning honor Native ancestors and the struggles of Native peoples to survive today. It is a day of remembrance and spiritual connection, as well as a protest of the racism and oppression which Native Americans continue to experience. This is erected by the town of Plymouth on behalf of the United American Indians of New England. So this is an organized rally, day of mourning, held every Thanksgiving Day at Coles Hill in Plymouth, Massachusetts. But, you know, I think as we continue to think about this, there is truth to what people are saying, right? It is factual that many Native Americans suffered at the hands of the settlers. The Native American history and conflict with the American people has been a painful one. According to the New York Times, 16 years after the Wampanoag shared that meal, they were massacred. According to History.com, from the time Europeans arrived on American shores, the frontier, the edge of territory between white man's civilization and the untamed natural world, became a shared space of vast clashing differences that led the U.S. government to authorize over 1,500 wars, attacks, and raids on Indians, the most of any country in the world against its indigenous people. If you'll recall, the Trail of Tears was real. It was a real thing beginning in 1831, where tens of thousands of Native Americans were forced to relocate from their ancestral lands in the Southeast to lands west of the Mississippi River, and many, many died on the way. So the question becomes, as Christians, who are, our job is to love, right? How do we celebrate this devastating day? Obviously, maybe this day itself wasn't devastating, but the history itself is devastating. So how can we celebrate this?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to that. That was just wrong. You're just giving false information.
Who
We
is?
should just cut it all out. No, I think some of the stuff that you have read are some of the stuff that we have grown up learning, and then I'm not saying it's counterfactual. It is, however, not the complete context. And so some of the stuff that we want to do is probably go to the beginning and the origins of Thanksgiving and why they are attacking Thanksgiving as opposed to some other holiday. Just pick a random day. Why Thanksgiving? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So why attack Thanksgiving? So what is Thanksgiving about? Well, the Pilgrims landed. By the way, Pilgrims are Puritans. Pilgrims are Christians.
Yep.
They wanted to worship God. They had so much persecution in the land that they were in, so that they fled, and they wanted a land of freedom so that they could worship as they wanted to, which is, one of the key tenets of our country. In the Constitution, we see that we have the freedom of religion, the freedom of speech. You can't just, stifle someone's speech or their beliefs, by the power of the state and things like that. But so many people died. Maybe around half the people died on the way here. And once they landed, they had a really bad winter.
Yep.
And maybe half the people died again. And then so they had a meager maybe harvest, but they did have a harvest. They wanted to give thanks to God. And their way of giving thanks to God was pretty spectacular in the way it's also recorded. What we have, from William Bradford is one of the people that recorded it. And that's why we have turkey, because there was wild fowl and turkey there. And then, the Indians would bring, or the Wampanoag specifically would bring venison.
Yep.
And so we have record of that. And they were able to share in a meal together. And they weren't always getting along. I'm not necessarily saying that the Pilgrims and the Indians didn't get along, but people from the West would come, and some would be good. Some would have more contentious, fights with them, like, for instance, the French. And so when people come, and then we have stories like Squanto that you like, who went and studied in Europe and France, and after that, and he would come and he'd be a good translator. And a lot of trade was established. Obviously, there were some diseases that came by, which is highlighted by every, it's like a talking point now. People brought diseases,
like
and
the
things
old
like
world
that.
virus. Yeah.
But then there's always diseases. People have been wiped out all the time by diseases. But of course, this one was brought by, on ship here. But that's what happens when people get connected. And so things like that happened. I just want to get to, before we get into any more detail, I just want to get to why Thanksgiving was celebrated and why it was such a wonderful religious observance for the people here. And they were so thankful that God gave them a harvest. And they were so thankful. And the people from the neighboring tribe came by and they celebrated with them this harvest, which is cause for celebration, which is also why we have this tradition of even eating turkey, even though I think turkey is not
so dry.
Really such a good meat.
Like, why?
But it's a tradition that's held, remembering that the Lord is good and that we ought to give thanks. In Psalm 107, verse 1, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, his love endures forever. So remembering things like that, we would have religious observances like Thanksgiving. And Thanksgiving is a religious observance. So why attack the religious observance when you have a qualm against, let's say, white colonialism? Why attack the religious observance? Because with Marxism, everything is dumbed down, everything is reduced, and everything is just white man bad, so that means white religion is bad. Christianity is a white religion, which it is not. And so this is what people have to get to. This is what people have to say. When people say we must give thanks, and you attack the actual act of giving thanks or the expression of giving thanks, you always have to sit back and wonder why. I gave a sermon a while back, a few years ago, and I think it was when Colin Kaepernick first came out and said, Thanksgiving is like the white man's, oppression against people. Yeah. But just, other people.
Yeah.
And, we can't celebrate Thanksgiving. People thought it was ridiculous. But then that was already there. And people already had picked up on that. And just Kaepernick made it more bigger at that time, at that year. And people didn't want to celebrate Thanksgiving, or they wouldn't do it with a full heart. And I remember mentioning how great Thanksgiving was. And then this one person who was sitting in the pews had this like wide-eyed look. Like, I can't believe you're saying what you're saying, that Thanksgiving is good.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. Thanksgiving is great. And so what about the indigenous people? And then you have to always go back to, what about the indigenous people? What about that is going against the spirit and the mandate of Thanksgiving? George Washington came out and he mandated, he's like, this is the Christian duty to give thanks. And this is a quote from him. It is the duty of all nations to acknowledge the providence of Almighty God, to obey His will, to be grateful for His benefits, and humbly to implore His protection and favor. And this is the proclamation that he issued in the first official, I guess, Thanksgiving in the United States in 1789. And so this is part of our history. This is part of our culture. This country has a Christian culture. Even when you were talking, you're saying we, but you weren't here. Your ancestors weren't here.
No.
How can you say we about America? It's because this is what America is. It's established on the fact that when you become naturalized, when you are born here, you become an American, meaning all of its history also belong to you. You are there now to defend it, to celebrate its joys, to continue on promoting the good values that it has, and all these things. And so it's not just George Washington, but presidents after. You mentioned FDR, but I'll mention Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln, even during the Civil War, established Thanksgiving as an annual national holiday. And he said, we should, and this is giving, as you're giving thanks, this is a quote from him. He said, quote, we should give thanks to, quote, our beneficent Father who dwelleth in the heavens. And so, unquote. And so these are things that all our forefathers, or presidents in the past, have acknowledged, that the good things that we have come from God. People are now inserting this Native American or indigenous people narrative. And why do they do it in Thanksgiving? When Thanksgiving was actually the opposite of what they're claiming. We actually had good relations. We ate with them. And then people, like they said, they didn't have enough food, so they would bring over venison. It's all recorded. The pushback that you get are things like now that are ridiculous, like, well, William Bradford was just one person. We don't have any other record. Why do we need other records when we have the one record and you have no substantiating evidence to say, otherwise? And so when you don't have any kind of evidence saying otherwise, why do you have to just say, I want to reject it? Because there is a narrative that you want to push. You want to push a narrative that this Thanksgiving cannot be celebrated because you don't want anything to do with Thanksgiving. I think that's the bottom line. The bottom line is, I really think that this spirit is an anti-Christian, a demonic spirit that has come over where you cannot give thanks for anything. Now, this isn't just specifically talking about the Thanksgiving holiday. I'm talking about the spirit of Thanksgiving. You can't give thanks for anything. So that's why, should we be thankful for our nation? Absolutely not, is what people will say. How can you be thankful for such a bigoted, racist, colonialist history? We should reject it entirely, tear everything down, and then, from there on, build, a utopia. It's Marxist. It's a French Revolution, the French Revolution was terrible, which they're still suffering from now. But, it's one of those things where I just want to say, from the get-go, before we get into the indigenous people argument, that Thanksgiving is a good spirit to have. Thanksgiving is a Bible-influenced, God-fearing, and humble attitude that people have to do. And so, you want to give Thanksgiving. You want to give thanks, and then you want to be able to celebrate a wonderful holiday like this. It isn't just simply a harvest holiday. We already had that with Halloween, right? The pagan one. But
Alwyn or something.
Thanksgiving is a religious one, and it's where we give thanks to the Lord. That's in our history. And I get it now, FDR wanted to do a bunch of stuff, but you still can't erase history. It is a Christian holiday, and I hope people remember that. As you celebrate Thanksgiving, give thanks to God, because that's what the Pilgrims did. That's what our forefathers remembered. And that's what we ought to also remember, that it's not just our states, but in the United States especially, we should give thanks for God's providence over us and our land.
So 2 just quick follow-up questions. You said that the information was incorrect. Which information was incorrect? I'm curious because these are all from pretty reputable sources. And so...
Well, okay, so incorrect in the sense where it doesn't really give you the full picture. So when you, for instance, the context, the premise that all indigenous people are just this one blob is false.
I see.
And I hope people recognize that too. Who are we talking about? Are we talking about the Sioux? Are we talking about the Wampanoag? Are we talking about the Apaches? Are we talking about like the Navajo, the tons of tribes that were here, yes, before the Pilgrims arrived, but who did they wipe out? And who are they still trying to wipe out? What about the Aztecs who wiped out just before Christopher Columbus landed, maybe like 6 to 8 years before Christopher Columbus landed? What did they? They sacrificed like 80,000 people at one time, which is one of the most brutal things that we could see in history. And this was their culture. This is what they were doing. This does not please God. So I want to say it from maybe as a side note, but maybe we could take this on later. But not all cultures are equal.
No.
Some cultures are savage and they are bad.
Yep.
They will lead to destruction, and you should not promote them. And one of those cultures are things like Aztec culture. It's brutal, it's savage. You do not promote stuff like that. Sure, they built some pyramids and things like that, and we can see how it correlates to the Egyptian pyramids, and we can, go, wow, look at the achievements that these things have happened. But why did they not last? Why doesn't any culture last? It's because they don't have the things that are eternal that will let them last, meaning the things of God. You can't have such a savage and brutal culture and expect it to thrive. In fact, it didn't. You kill yourselves out. And when we're talking about the American Indians, a lot of tribes were at war with each other. In fact, that's where we were in. So when we're talking about history, the people from the West that came here, some of them had treaties, but they made allies. And in their alliance with these other tribes would say, help me fight against this other tribe. And then within that alliance, you would see a lot of Christians also being converted, people being converted to Christianity.
Yeah.
Case in point, Squanto is one of them. And so it's a little more complicated than what people want to say. Again, if you have believed this Marxist lie, it really dumbs down everything. It really dumbs down history, reduces it to a point where when you bring in any kind of nuance or detail or any kind of truth, which is what I was trying to get in, any kind of fact, you can't accept it. You have to just reject it. It's what we see in politics today. You can't vote for this man because he's a bigot, racist, a Nazi. So what if you voted for him? Then you become the bigot, racist Nazi. So what? Then half the people in America are bigot, racist Nazis? And
right.
Then you have to accept that. And then that's why it doesn't make any sense. You're like, everybody's a bigot, racist Nazi. I can't believe I'm living in this country. I must flee. And then you go to another country, which is also filled with bigot, racist Nazis, apparently. But it's just, you can't survive because it's just not reality.
Yeah.
So when we're trying to talk about the things that happen, let's say in Thanksgiving, we want to give the ultimate reality. The ultimate reality is that this was a day of feasting and worship. It was a religious observance because they recognized, even though half the people died and it was such a horrible winter, they still could worship God as they pleased, and that's what they wanted. And God still gave them enough so that they could have a feast and they could celebrate. But look at where they are now. Look at where the Pilgrims started and where we are now with the thriving of society, the grandeur of this nation, because of the humble beginnings that this nation had. And I think that's worth celebrating. I think we should give thanks to God for what he has done through the people in this nation and how we have become a part of it by either being born here in this nation or becoming nationalized as citizens. But we can really celebrate the providence and the goodness and the faithfulness of God to his people.
So what if someone were to respond to you and they're a Christian? What if they were to respond to you saying, I continually gave thanks. I always give thanks to God daily as is, right? Why do I have to celebrate this holiday that has now become more of like a marketing scheme for people to buy things? It's become a very commercial holiday where people have to shop and buy and do all these different things, right? Why do I have to celebrate this one day of Thanksgiving when I normally give thanks, especially in light of understanding the historical context, meaning just the history between the Americans and the Native Americans, knowing that and the pain that some of them may be going through in remembering this? Why do I have to celebrate this day? I give thanks every day regularly.
Yeah, I think that is a very good question, especially because I think that's how our generation would think. And this is a sermon I wanted to preach for my family because my family has a Thanksgiving service.
Oh yeah,
every year, and this year we're doing it here at our church. So I always invite anybody that wants to come. You could come to CGS and do this Thanksgiving service with us. I do warn people that it's about 2 hours, but I think last year, 2 years ago or something like that, we had a record 1.5 hours. So that's great. It was a record low. So I think we're going to try to keep it to 1.5 hours.
Yeah.
But man, when I was a kid, it was about 3 hours.
Oh.
And so, you come here at 10 and then we start eating at like at 2 or 1 or something like that. But we eat after. So anybody's welcome to come, especially if you are, if your parents are like in a different state or a different country, you could always come celebrate with my family. I think because the worship thing is the key part. And so if you're like, well, why do I have to celebrate this day? I'm just thankful all the time. First of all, I don't want to doubt what you're saying, but I doubt it. I don't know. I don't want to doubt it, but I doubt it. And here's the reason why. This is what I wanted to preach on that Thanksgiving, or this is the theme. It's about tradition and what you have grown up, what your mother and father have taught you, how you're supposed to have it as a garland around you to grace your head and things like that. Tradition is there for a reason. And if I can't accept tradition, you're saying that I don't appreciate this about my parents and the things that came before them. I can't relate to them. I can't sympathize. I get it that they were imperfect people, but what they did was ultimately good because I am here now by, the good things that they did. If they didn't do good things, I wouldn't be here. And so I give thanks for that. And so tradition is also something like that. I get it. Not every tradition is good and it should be tested and should be weighed. But the Thanksgiving tradition is good. And I hope that we were able to establish that in the beginning portion of this podcast. But when you're saying, I just don't want to do it because it's a little complex, there's all these nuances here, these complexities, and I just don't want to do it because in the end, it's you want to go with the narrative that the world is saying. Or, the Marxists are saying. I want us to reject that narrative. I want us to say that Thanksgiving is good. And I didn't even go as far as to say that, what some other right-wing, commentators are saying. The Native Americans, this is what they're saying. Native Americans were just they were plundered and they were conquered. That's what it was. I don't think it's that simple, obviously, but obviously one culture won out. And if you're a Native American, you can still keep your culture, but you still have to adopt Western ideals. So whatever is antithetical to Western ideals and Western culture, if you don't adopt it, you can't thrive. You can't function in society. For instance, if you still think that this is something basic, is if you still think that this is what I remember learning in second grade, but if you still think that building a fire is the only way to heat your home or heat your family during the cold winter months, and then they give you a house, and there's all you have to do is turn on the thermostat. You'd be like, I reject that. I reject that tradition. I reject that culture. I reject that technology. I reject anything Western. So you build a fire in your home. Not in the fireplace, but you right smack dab in the middle of the living room. Your house will burn down, which is what literally did happen. This actually happened is the thing. So people did not want to educate themselves. They didn't want to say this is actually a good thing. Believe it or not, a lot of the things that we do, even though all these young Marxists and leftists have come out like, I reject everything about this. You still adopt a ton of that culture. You can't get rid of it all. And that's why you're always enraged. That's why you can never be thankful, because you're always trying to get rid of it, but you just can't. You were born with it. You were given this. And that's why this, like the greats like George Washington would recognize you have to acknowledge the providence of the Almighty God. You are here where you are today in this very moment in time because of God. You reject it because you hate God. And you're saying I could be thankful anywhere. I think you're misguided or misinformed if you really think that you could reject all kinds of tradition and then just say, I'm just going to make up a new tradition. I want to be thankful on my own. So what's that? What is that? That's a new tradition. What kind of new tradition do you have that's better than the old one? Weigh it, measure it. If it's found wanting, you get rid of it, that kind of thing. Sure, we weigh every tradition according to the Word of God, and guess what? Thanksgiving is not only passes through the filter of the Word of God, it was inspired by the Word of God. It had its origins in the Word of God. And so what are you trying to get rid of? And that's really the question. What are you trying to get rid of? Are you trying to get rid of a celebration, thanking the Lord for providing a means of survival, a way to live after the incredible hardship that the pilgrims in the Mayflower had to endure? Mayflower 1, Mayflower 2, and all the ships that came afterwards and things like that. Are you saying that you don't want to be thankful for that because what ensued afterwards is these really peaceful, these were basically angels. These indigenous people were like basically angels. They had wings. They were flying around, and they were just all at peace with each other.
Right.
They didn't need any technology because they just floated. And because they were doing that, oh, look at these savages. They came and then they just cut off all their wings. I think that's the picture people have.
Yeah.
This is absolutely not true. This is not factual is what I'm saying. Not everybody is hunky-dory. In fact, every tribe was at war with each other or at a very short-term treaty with each other. And then they brought it to the white man that were settling, because the white man just wanted to settle and they wanted to be their own in the beginning, and then eventually the settlers just increased into what we have, and people would argue then that was bad, and I would argue again, no, it wasn't. It's just a natural part of growing and expanding and being fruitful and multiplying in the land, and being able to find a place for you and your family so you can have farm and, thrive in that society. So there's all these nuances that we could go over if you wanted to. But the reason why you don't want the nuance, I think, is because you need this reductionist, very dumbed down version of history so you could satisfy this ideology that you have been fed so that you can continue to hate history. You could hate your parents. Ultimately, hating your parents and hating your history is hating God. And I hope people get that, because that's the fifth commandment. Right after 1, 2, 3, 4, which is about God, it's honor your father and mother.
Yeah.
That's the fifth commandment. And if you don't know how to honor your father and mother, it's because you cannot connect it to 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's because you hate God. You hate the first authorities that you were given. You hate the tradition that has been passed down to you, the good ones that has been passed down to you. You hate everything. And it's because you really hate God. And you want to make your own, society. You want to have that great reset of morals. You want to be your own Ubermensch. You want to, do the madman. And this is all Nietzschean philosophy that I'm mentioning, but you are like the madman. You're like, we have to start all over because God is dead. And you're like, this is you think to yourself, this is an incredible adventure I'm on. But it's not an incredible adventure. It's a decadent adventure to death. You're going down. And you see that dismantling of everything that is good. You have to, upturn every single statue, remembrance, tradition. You have to rename St. Louis.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you don't want it to be named after a crusader.
Louis
because
the
everything, everything is bad. And you don't even know who St. Louis is. You just know that he's a crusader, so he must be bad.
Yeah.
And you don't know anything about what he did and why he was a great saint. And that's why the city was named after him. The accomplishments that he had, the people that he saved from slavery, from martyrdom, from death, from like imminent death and torture.
Yeah.
You don't want to talk about stuff like that. You just say crusader bad, Western people bad. And it's such a simplistic, it's so dumbed down. It's actually quite offensive in so many ways. And what are we supposed to sit here and not be offended by what you're spitting on? Ultimately, you're spitting on God, because I'm telling you, it leads back up to a hatred of God. And you're like, no, I worship Jesus, but I reject all of the history. Where do you think all this stuff came from? You just, you were just born, and then all of a sudden you decided to worship Jesus on your own. Jesus came to you and said, here I am, Frank. I don't know if your name is Frank.
Franklin.
Here I am, Franklin. Worship me, and everything else is, is just bunk. And that's not how it works, my friend. And so I hope that you recognize when we give thanks, it's for all his goodness throughout history, and how you have also today, in this very moment, you have benefited from the goodness that God has given throughout history. That is why we could give thanksgiving.
So I get it that we're supposed to give thanks, and I get it that there's tradition, but how come, someone might say, how come you can't admit that these terrible things happened? Like the Trail of Tears, that really happened. The massacres, that really happened. How come you can't admit those things at the same time celebrating this holiday that you love?
I don't think we didn't admit it, right? I think there were some complicated things, and some of the things were bad. I think some people came here with bad intent, but a lot of people here were good. And I think that's what I want to get at. What's the origin? The origin of Thanksgiving, the origin of people settling here, it was a good thing. Mm-hmm. And obviously people are going to try to muddy the waters, because selfish people will come, evil people will come. But I'm going against that narrative, saying for the most part, it was good. For the most part, people did good when they came here. And this is what people will try to flip. And say, no, the Pilgrims were an exception. The treaty, the 50-year treaty, that was an exception. No, it wasn't. It was an exception. That was actually the norm. What people tried to do when they came here and they would trade, like the French. Man, I shouldn't say anything too bad about the French, but the French would come.
Bonjour.
And then they'll mess things up. No, but yeah, it's just obviously people will come with their own agenda, but that's anything. Isn't that anything? So what happens when people try to muddy the waters? You try to clean it up, because the origin was good. You try to remember what the origin was. I'm not trying to erase history. That's exactly what you're doing with that kind of, historical misrepresentation. That's not what happened. Obviously, there were some bad things that went on. Obviously, some people were upset if their family member was killed, miscommunication, and they would go on a killing spree of Indians. Maybe they killed the wrong ones at certain times.
Right.
Obviously, things like that happen. And it was, it's called the Wild West for a reason. It's like the time of Judges, you know what I mean? And so, obviously, bad things are going to happen. But ultimately, what happens, even in the book of Judges, ultimately what happens, God raises up judges to lead his people and turn them back to God. And this is what we also want to do. We also want to recognize that this became established. All of this helped us establish a Christian nation, the Christian nation that we have now. And Thanksgiving is a big part of that. And that's what we want to remember. We want to remember what helped establish this nation to be a Christian nation. This isn't a Muslim nation. This isn't a Catholic nation even. This is a Protestant Christian nation. And so this is what we want to remember. Even if you look at the Declaration of Independence, every single signer was a Protestant Christian, except for like 2 or something like that. And like 1 was Catholic or something to that effect. But this is what we want to remember. We have our history here, and we want to remember the goodness of God.
So as a Christian, understanding the importance of Thanksgiving, I think the question that a lot of people might have is, and I think a lot of people would agree with you, but the question that they may have is, how much do we give into this type of quote unquote woke agenda in the sense of how much do we consider the suffering of Native Americans on this holiday at the same time celebrate this holiday? So I think you could fall between two extremes, right? There's this one extreme where you say this holiday is terrible. You're celebrating the massacre of Native Americans and you don't celebrate it. Then on the other hand, it could be, I don't care about Native Americans. This is America. I'm going to celebrate it anyway.
Yeah, I don't see, even the word massacre, I just can't subscribe to. I guess, you might think I'm on the fringe on this, but I don't think so. I think there's historical evidence to back this up. And even if you look at Britannica, you'll know that the white people just didn't come down and mow people down.
Yeah.
A ton of white people died too.
Yeah.
A ton of the settlers died. They were attacked randomly too by warring tribes that just didn't like them. Some tribes were friendly and peaceful.
Scalping.
And then, there were some savage practices that they did. They didn't just do that to white people. They did it to each other. And all these things. So it's not like, settlers came in and then they just mowed people down. And then all of a sudden we have to jump to the Trail of Tears. That's not what happened. And so I don't think I can really subscribe to that kind of representation. Secondly, if you think that, let's say you think that, so the white people came and they massacred the Indians. I guess they were conquered. Even if you thought and accept that narrative, which I don't, then they are a conquered people. And if they are conquered people, they are subject then to the nation and its laws and its sovereignty and its borders. I mean, even if you thought in that extreme.
Right.
So there is no place for you to actually say that we should start doing some kind of apology tour to the Native Americans. There's no place for that.
Yeah.
Even if you accept one of those 2 narratives that I just gave you, obviously I'm not on that second side where I just think that, people came, they warred to conquer. I think they were a conquered people in the sense where, eventually what you saw was an overtaking of what was superior, a culture that was obviously going to thrive, and this other culture that was obviously going to die out. Look, if the Western culture didn't come and take over this Native American culture, if I were to reduce it to that, then another culture would have come and they would have wiped them out too. Yeah. That's exactly what it was. What was there before the Japans? When the Japanese came, weren't there an indigenous people and islanders there? Absolutely. Look at Osaka. If you go to Japan and you look at the Osakans there, they look completely different from the people in the center of the Japanese island, which look really Korean. And so, Time Magazine did a whole thing on this where they knew that from the 3 kingdoms, because Koreans had 3 kingdoms in their peninsula, and then the losing kingdom eventually migrated to the Japanese island or the islands, and then there was already a tribe there. Guess who took them over? The Japanese. Why don't you complain to the Japanese? No one complains. In fact, the Japanese honor those tribal people because they mixed with them. But then what happens? So I am all for honoring Native Americans, by the way. I love it. I love the fact that we have football teams named after them, like the Chiefs or the Braves or whatever. I love it.
Yeah.
I love that we can honor them, which is also what the Japanese do, because they want to absorb them into now what they have as Japanese culture or American culture. But that's what it is. American Indian culture does not stand apart from American culture. They're American. And so, if they want to keep some of that history, that's great, which, if you go to Osaka, they still have some of that stuff. Every nation is like that. And so even if you talk about the conquering and the subjecting, they're not our slaves. We didn't subject them to slaves or slavery. And so we didn't do that. If they did, I would have something to say about that then.
Right.
But they didn't do that. In fact, they're honored. We give them reservations. We give them land. There's constant federal support. I wish they would adopt Christian culture more.
Yeah.
And I think they would thrive more. But they are not the dominant culture. And I hope people understand that. One out. And that's what it is. And if you don't adopt it, then you'll become extinct, because a dominant culture has come in. And that's what the Western culture is. And that's what people want to label that as a plague. But I think of it differently. I think it's Christ's supremacy and what he teaches in the word that is superior, that is ruling. But people don't want to say that. People want to say all cultures are equal. This is false, okay? Not all cultures are equal. It's false. And so, when you want to go back with, you don't want to call it a massacre, you don't want to call it colonialism. No, I don't, because I just don't think that's the truth. I just don't think that's the whole picture. Obviously, there were some nefarious agents in our history, and that we want to condemn some of their acts. But, I don't think for the most part, and I don't think it is for the origin either.
So you said Western culture won out. You've talked about Christ, Christian morals, values. It almost might even seem like you're attaching Western culture and Christian culture together. Absolutely.
Western culture is Christian culture. And if you don't think so, then think about so this is a broad history podcast, I suppose.
It is, yeah.
Think about Hitler in Nazi Germany. Eventually, he had to get rid of Western culture. And he couldn't stand with Christian culture, because Christian culture is Western culture. And what did he do? He adopted the whole Ubermensch idea with the superior Aryanism, right? That, the blue eyes, the blonde hair, that's superior.
Yeah.
And so what did he start adopting? He started adopting paganism, and he started to adopt Viking mythology. Viking mythology is part of Western history, but it isn't Western culture.
Okay.
I hope people recognize that. Western culture is Christian culture. And so, we could say like, oh, look at these Vikings, they're cool, but we don't live like the Vikings.
No.
Nobody in the Western hemisphere lives like the Vikings, because that culture has died out. What has come to reign supreme, the culture that was started in the Middle East, that made its way west, and now is here and around the world. And that's Christian culture. Western culture is Christian culture. Having two parents, raising them, multiplying, working hard, being on time. People go, oh, that's Western culture. No, man, that's Christian culture. That's why Christian culture thrives throughout society. That's why economically it thrives, because when we say it's superior, we're saying it's superior economically, we're saying it's superior socially, we're saying it's superior religiously, we're saying it's superior in all spheres of life. When Jesus comes down in Isaiah chapter 9, the government is upon his shoulders. All of society is ruled by Christ. And that's what we mean when we say Western culture. I'm not just talking about Greek mythology. That thing's dead. We don't call any of our cities like, maybe we do, but we don't follow Zeus. Mm-hmm. We don't follow, that kind of Greek mythology. We don't follow Viking mythology. We don't follow the Norse gods, even though we want to celebrate Thor and things like that. And then we have all these superheroes. That's not who we follow. We kind of look at it like, look at this character in the past and we can kind of have fun with it now. But that's not who we worship. And so I hope people recognize that. We worship Jesus and we worship all the history, tradition, and the culture that has been bestowed upon us from our forefathers that came before us that made us who we are now. That's the God who we worship. We worship the God that all our forefathers have been worshiping, the God of the Bible.
So if we are connecting Western culture and Christian culture together and it's synonymous, people might even hear you on this podcast and think, well, so what you're saying then is that Christian culture resulted in the Trail of Tears. Christian culture resulted in natives dying. Christian culture resulted in this. How can Christian culture result in this? Or are you just saying that this is just what happens in war? And so is there nothing Christian about war then?
I think it's a truly Christian stance to defend your home. And, again, it's complicated. There are some times, you might overstep, sometimes where you don't go far enough. And so those are things that it's easy for us to judge.
Yeah.
Because, we're always looking in hindsight, but, could we have done some things better? Obviously. And so Christian culture is a culture of repentance. And so that's what we do. No other culture really repents for anything. That's what they are. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What's the longest running society that had slaves?
Not the Roman Empire.
No, it's Koreans. And so
it was?
Yeah, the Koreans had the longest unbroken chain of slavery. But Koreans just sit there complaining about the Japanese.
Yeah. And military service.
Yeah, but then that's my point is I'm not complaining about the Koreans. That's not my point. Okay, I'm not complaining about the Koreans. I'm just saying Christian culture is repentance. So they're trying to use a virtue that we have against us now.
Yeah.
And so you feel bad, and then instead of doing better now, reject everything. Reject your God. Reject Thanksgiving. Reject the holidays. Reject the tradition. It's like, no. I don't want to reject that. That's good stuff. I want to keep that. I will reject, however, when we have gone too far. When we have had, wars or, maybe some kind of military excursions that may not have been in line with Christian ideals and virtues. Sure, maybe. But for the most part, I love it. Look at, the Treaty of Tripoli, the Barbary Wars, super good stuff. I love it. I love that about our history. I love that the United States has the Barbary Wars in its history. I don't know why no one talks about it. Why don't people know about it? That's like one of the major wars against the Muslims that this nation had. It's like we can't talk about it because of Islamophobia. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
So no one talks about it, and no one knows your history. And so all we know is like we killed some, Native Americans. That's all there is to this history. That's false. That's so false. Like people from outside our country were coming in to enslave people. And that's exactly what the Muslims in the North African tribes were doing. And then we went to war against them and we destroyed them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's something that we could be proud of. The Treaty of Tripoli before that, so that we wanted peace before. That's the point. We wanted peace before, but they kept on coming and invading our shores, invading our waters, and then taking ships. These pirates were taking ships and then enslaving people that were citizens, that were Americans. And what are the Americans going to do? Nothing? Nothing? Are we going to do nothing? And so you could be proud about stuff like that. What are you proud of? If I were to flip the question, what are you proud of that the Americans have done in the last 248 years? What are you proud of? Are you proud of anything? And if you say you can't be proud of anything because of this one reductive factoid that you think that you have, then I'm afraid that you've been given into this Marxist theology. I think that's what it is. Yeah. Because in the end, you have to worship Marxist ideology.
Yeah.
It is a religion. You have to submit to it. You say you believe Jesus, but I'm telling you, it's going to overtake your commitment to Jesus if you continue to give in to stuff like this. We should give Marxist ideology no quarter. We should give them no inch into our churches, into our teaching. because it is antithetical to Christian teaching. That's what Marx wanted. He hated religion.
Yep.
And so he wanted something that is antithetical to religion, to Christianity. He was born in a Jewish family, but they attended church for networking reasons. So he knew of the Christian faith. He was never a Christian, and he wanted something to destroy and dismantle the Christian faith. He's a bad guy. And yet we continue to adopt his principle, saying, let's take some of it. Don't we want to take some of it? Because with the lens, we could see where there's racism. I'm like, no, man, you can't. And they're like, that seems like you want to promote racism. Absolutely not. I want to get rid of racism. But Marxism isn't how we do it.
Yeah, cultural Marxism is tough. So, we've had a pretty lengthy discussion on the history of Thanksgiving, and I guess just the views that we have been fed and the views that we should be reflecting on, rejecting. And I think now would be a good time to ask, then how should Christians spend Thanksgiving?
Let's do three things. Just remember three things, and let's remember the three things. One thing is remember God's providence over your life. That's how you can thank him. Number two, express it in prayer and worship. My family actually does come together to worship. So even if you're in a family, let's say you're leading your own family, pray and give worship in this time.
Yeah.
And number three, remember community and fellowship. Remember how everybody kind of banded together in the first Thanksgiving, and remember how they even invited people.
Yeah.
To be part of that, and that affected them, their future. In a perfect world, I think, this is the idealist in me, but I think, the Western culture or the Pilgrims would have gotten just fine, along fine with the Wampanoag, with all the other American native tribes that were there before the Pilgrims arrived. And so I think they would have just gotten just right along, unless somebody, invaded them or killed them, and then you have a problem. You have a problem in your hands, right? And so one of those things that we see is we should really foster community and fellowship during this time. So, if you are, I think a lot of people in our church do this, but if you are a part of a fellowship, like a church, invite people in your church over.
Yeah.
And celebrate with them. Have good turkey. Put lots of gravy if it's too dry. Or, I don't know, I think people always have like these new fantastic methods of making.
They try to double fry it. I can't tell the difference, to be honest with you.
I try fried turkey. I like fried chicken better, but it's all
fried chicken is fantastic.
Yeah, it's all good.
Speaking of turkeys, I want to talk about turkeys a little bit. It's a little sidebar. 46 million turkeys are killed. 46 million. They are grown on factory farms. They're killed when they're 3 to 5 months old. They're packed into dark sheds with no more than 3.5 square feet of space per bird. They are bred to grow as quickly as possible, and they often become crippled under their own weight. Their toes and upper beaks are sometimes cut off so that they don't scratch each other. They're transported on trucks for slaughter for hours without food or water, and many die on this journey. Then at the slaughterhouse, they're hung upside down. They're dragged through an electrified stunning tank, which stuns them. Then their throats are slit. Many birds dodge the tank and are cut while they are conscious. And so after that, then they're scalded in a tank of boiling water that is used for feather removal. This is pretty graphic. This is from PETA, by the way.
You love these leftist websites.
No, so I chose PETA because if there is one narrative that will dramatize the life of a turkey, it is PETA. So therefore, I sided with PETA on this one. But I didn't side. I stood with PETA. I didn't stand. I looked at PETA. So in response to this, right, I don't know if this is 100% factual. It's PETA saying this again. But assuming that it's true, right, should we then not eat turkey on Thanksgiving? Christians are to take care of the earth. This isn't necessarily doing that. Are we only supposed to eat free-roaming, cage-free turkeys? Because then this also goes into discussion of then what can we eat here in America?
Yeah, I mean, do as your conscience allows. For me, I have zero qualms. Sorry to disappoint. you PETA lovers, but I think this is why I love the free market that we have. If people don't buy it, they won't do it.
Yeah.
If you really want to buy it and you want to buy the cheapest way, they'll make it the cheapest way possible, and then they'll give it to you. And so if you want to spend an extra or pay double, triple the price you would for a regular, let's say Tyson's turkey or something like that.
Butterball.
Or Butterball. Yeah, you want to do that, or you want to make a relationship with a farmer, do that. And that's totally fine with me. And I think that's where that market will grow. And if enough people want to do that, the market will change. And I think that's something maybe PETA might even agree with me on, Don't buy stuff if you don't agree with some of the methods that they have. I think that's the beauty of it. But if you do buy it, you're barely getting by. There's a turkey out there, and you just want to celebrate this wonderful holiday with your family. Oh, man, get that turkey at the cheapest price possible and celebrate. And God bless you. And I hope that you'll have the means to do better in the coming years, and praise the Lord for just the fact that you could get a turkey and eat it at your table. I'm so happy for you. And so that's what I will say to that person who buys the Butterball or the Tyson. And, if you feel like, you know what, I have enough money, I don't want to give money to this. I actually don't think it's really good to ingest something like this. So, you know what, let me get a free-range turkey.
Ooh.
Or I'll just go hunt on my own a wild turkey.
Oh, wow.
It's not good. Yeah, wild turkey is like super lean.
I heard it's gamey.
It's barely edible.
Yeah.
But, and that's the thing. That's what the Pilgrims celebrated. They had wild fowl and turkey.
Yeah.
And they ate that with Thanksgiving. Maybe you want to get back to the original. There's a ton of turkeys in Paramus, although it's illegal for you to kill them. You could do it, without anybody knowing. But I didn't tell you to do that, so.
I should have donned a pilgrim hat today is what I should have done. A little black hat with a buckle. I should have done that.
Yeah. I love the Pilgrims. Pilgrims are awesome. They're awesome people. And I'm so happy they're a part of the nation's origins.
Yeah. I heard tofurkey is... I actually haven't heard anything about tofurkey.
Tofurkey?
Tofurkey is like
I heard it was terrible.
Urkey. I don't understand how it
is
would be.
kind of... So there are some excess...
What's turducken?
So some are about an excess. So instead of celebrating, it's just, going overboard. You stuff a turkey with a duck, and then you stuff that duck with a chicken. I guess you have to stuff the duck first with the chicken, and then you stuff that stuffed duck into a turkey.
Oh, that's tough.
And then you deep fry it all, and then you have something called a turducken.
Wow.
I didn't know that. It's pretty creative. I'll give you that.
Oh man. But yeah.
If anybody eats a turducken, could you please let me know how it tastes?
I'm curious.
I heard it's good because the
it has to be
duck
tender.
Fats kind of mix in with the turkey, and plus you're deep frying that baby. So
makes sense.
Man, good.
But thank you for that. I think that's very helpful for us as we give thanks during this Thanksgiving season and spend time with our families. I remember what you said about, I think it was one of the late night hosts, talking about how Thanksgiving dinner this year will be very, very interesting due to the election results. And so with that, I want to talk about the election results, going into a quick Q&A.
We need a beat.
What you got in the bag? What you got in the bag?
What you got in the bag?
So someone submitted a question asking, is it okay to feel good that Trump won? Shouldn't you mourn with those who mourn?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think if you believe that we have dodged the bullet with Kamala, and a lot of conservative Christian leaders also think this. Maybe they won't say it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But they think this. It might have been the last election that we'd had. Oh, conspiracy. Well, not really. It's not a conspiracy anymore. Where we actually saw voter rolls filled with, in these swing states, we saw voter rolls filled with people that were not citizens, that were illegally here.
Right.
Because, when you take a census, I'm sure people know this, But when you take a census, you take the census and then you can have a representative. The census isn't of the citizens, it's of everyone who lives there, including non-citizens. So this includes illegal immigrants. If you take the census and let's say 20,000 people live in your city, you have a representative, let's say, right? Whereas if you had 3 people, you wouldn't. So you could just fill it in with and just get more representatives. You could actually game the system like that, and that's what people have been doing. And so all these nefarious things were going on, and people couldn't say anything because if you said anything, you were a bigot or you liked Orange Man or something like that.
Yeah.
And so if how can you like Orange Man Hitler? I was like, dude, I didn't say anything about Orange Man Hitler. I just talked about the nefarious things that are happening, and no one's saying anything about when this stuff is happening. Oh, what about this? What about this? And all these red herrings come up. But what you want to do is, I don't know if you should necessarily gloat, but to celebrate, wear a MAGA hat. That's totally fine. We have a good friend of ours who wore a MAGA hat and an outfit, Virgil Walker.
Yeah.
And then he wore it in public.
Oh yeah.
And so, I have nothing wrong with that. I don't see anything wrong with that. And people are like, oh, make sure it's not idol worship. Obviously. Obviously. Obviously no one thinks no one I know at least thinks that Trump is like King David or Jesus or Moses.
That's tough.
I think the closest correlation that I saw was Cyrus. And so,
King Cyrus?
yeah, that he's a Cyrus because he is not a Christian, but will help Christians, their Christian plight.
That's the guy that sent back Nehemiah and Ezra,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Okay.
So he will have sympathy toward Christians.
Right.
Which I don't disagree with. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Kamala would completely be the opposite of that.
Yeah.
She kept on throwing pro-lifers in jail. I'm hoping that as soon as Trump becomes president, like day one, he's going to pardon every single pro-lifer that's been put in jail. This is something that I vehemently hated about the previous administration. Again, abortion, that's one of the key things. And someone goes, yeah, obviously, because abortion is such a big issue for you. And I'm like, in my head, I'm thinking, it should be a big deal for everybody.
Yeah.
What do you mean for me?
Yeah.
And so this should be a big deal for everybody. And I hope that people recognize I could celebrate that, and be hopeful that Planned Parenthood is defunded. And there's talks about that now.
Right.
With
Elon.
the Doge. Yeah.
Vivek and Elon.
Yeah. The Doge doing that. The
Elon.
Department of Government Efficiency doing that.
Yeah.
And there's hopes. I'm praying that this happens. And I'm hoping and praying that true justice get done, which is you let go of those pro-lifers and then you put in the baby murderers, you put in the abortionists. And one day, I really hope that abortion will be an unthinkable thing in the United States and in the world. But yeah, you can celebrate. Don't worry. Mourning with those who mourn is a foolish application here. Why should we mourn? Because you pick someone that is completely anti-Christian, that in her rally, she said the quiet part out loud, where when someone said Jesus is Lord, she said, oh, you're at the wrong rally.
Yep.
You mean to go to the rally down the street, the much smaller rally. That's really what she thought.
Yep.
But Jesus is not Lord there. And that's what she wanted. Someone else, after that, someone else said that in a J.D. Vance rally, and he just said, Amen, Christ is King. And then you could move on.
Yep.
You could have at least said that. You can't say that. This is someone that you supported as a Christian. That's hard, man. That's a hard sell for me, bro. And I'm going to be honest with you. People are like, well, you definitely voted for Trump, blah, blah, blah. No, I never said who I voted for. But
Me neither. JK.
But I did say you can't vote for Kamala.
Yeah.
You can't vote for someone that is so staunchly anti-Christian because you believe that Orange Man Hitler bad, bigot, evil, racist. To me, that's not an argument that flew. And I'm sorry if you fell into that one. But people held their noses and voted Trump. I saw a ton of people that did that. Like, we don't like him, but we're going to vote for him. And then one lady said, you know what? I have come to peace to say that I don't like Trump, but I'm going to happily vote for him because I realize something. This is what she said. I don't have to like somebody to vote for him. I don't have to like the executive. I don't have to like the person that takes out my garbage. I just want them to take out the garbage. And this person is going to take out the garbage.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. And so those are things that people have rationalized, they've reasoned and come to terms with. I'm sad that so many of our high intellectual elites can't come to terms with that. Something simple like that. You don't have to like your president. You don't have to open a beer and drink a beer with them. That is the most moronic thing that I've ever seen, where I saw Stephen Colbert say, people just want to drink a beer with the president, so they open up a beer. So him and Kamala opened up a beer in his in his Tonight Show and drank it. That's not what I want to do with my president. I want the president to be able to be the executive.
I don't really want him to drink, actually.
He doesn't drink.
He should be alert, at all times. Yeah.
Donald Trump does not drink because of his history. If you knew what his family went through, he never touched alcohol. But those are things that we get to see. People say that about me all the time. I want to be able to just chit chat with the pastor. Yeah, I just want to have a beer with you. I want to have a meal with you. And sometimes I'll be like, yeah, sure, let's have a meal.
Yeah.
But I'm sorry, to break the news to you, my primary job isn't to have a meal with you. My primary job is to preach the word of God. And because we are a close-knit family, having a meal together will be natural. It's going to happen naturally. But that's not my primary job. And so it's even more so with the executive to the nth degree. If he's leading 350 million people, his job isn't to have a beer with 350 million people. That's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
And so some of these stupid things started to come out. And I was kind of disappointed that people were falling for this. Why is this a priority? So now that Trump is president, if you want to celebrate, if you're really happy that we dodged a bullet, I think the guys on Apologia Radio said this. What's his name again? Yeah, Jeff Durbin. All those guys said this. It was like, but this is what he was saying. I'm happy, but this is where our fight begins.
Yeah.
We don't stop here. I could be happy that Trump is president, but we will continue to fight for our values. We'll continue to fight for the sanctity of life in our nation, that we protect babies in their most vulnerable state, that people will not be able to kill their babies anytime they want, that we will not promote a culture of women being able to kill their babies thinking that it's good. We will fight that fight. And so, yeah, Trump is president. And he's so much better, like a million times better than Kamala on this issue. But our fight isn't over. And so how people remember that. You could celebrate the win, but our fight isn't over. We're going to continue to promote what is good, what is true, and what is beautiful according to the word of God. And I think one of the primary battles that we have been given in our generation today is to protect babies.
So what I find interesting about this question is the mourn with those who mourn, right? And this is from Romans chapter 1. Romans chapter 12, verse 15. What's interesting is it says, rejoice with those who rejoice. So why can't they rejoice with me? But, it's interesting because I think, like we've been seeing, people have been mourning, right? And Christians have been mourning. And so as Christians that love our neighbor, I understand that it is, in my humble opinion, delusional for people to mourn about this. Because if you're mourning about something, that means you've lost something greatly, right? So for example, I love that the Celtics won last year. I love it. Are people mourning that they won? No one's mourning. Why? Because it doesn't matter. Okay, well then what's different about this election? Oh, because, people's rights are being taken away. Because, we voted in a fascist because of all this. And then we start getting into policy of, okay, do you really have a reason to mourn here? Right? And for me, I don't think there is a reason to mourn here. But the fact is, people are mourning, right? Delusional or not, people are mourning. And as Christians, we are to love our neighbor. In what sense can we minister and counsel those who are mourning, understanding that their mourning is unwarranted and unbased? How do we still counsel and minister and speak with those who are mourning?
I think some people are really sad and upset. It'll take time for them to get over it. And Thanksgiving might not be the happiest time for you. But, for me, it's, always being gracious. You want to be a gracious winner. Does it mean you shouldn't wear your MAGA hat toward to your family dinner? I don't know. Could be in some cases. It could be some cases you should wear it. For instance, if I'm thinking about Brian, he should wear the MAGA hat. If I'm thinking about Junseok, he should wear the MAGA hat. If I'm thinking about you, Sam, maybe you shouldn't wear the MAGA hat. You know what I mean? So it really depends.
Right.
People who aren't that adamant, maybe, this is something that you want to do. Maybe something that, it really depends. Obviously, that the former example thing was a joke, but, it really depends. Use your discernment. You want to make sure that you want to keep your relationships at the center because that's what conservatives do, right? And so just keep your relationship at the center and make sure that you are loving your family members and, promoting what is good. If they can't help it and all this vitriol starts spilling out of your mouth, spilling out of their mouth, I don't know if necessarily you should jump in, perhaps. But I think because of the audience that we have, I will say that sometimes you should speak up. I'm just speaking to our audience. I feel like maybe most of our audience are people that wouldn't say anything.
Right.
So sometimes you need to speak up. Sometimes you have to be like,
no,
I will never, ever vote for someone that is so pro-abort in that this is a record pro-abortionist that came up on the ticket. I will never cast a ballot for that. You can say something like that because that's what I have said in the past. And they're like, okay, I respect that. That's exactly what happened. I respect that, but I don't agree with you and that kind of thing. So I've had conversations like that. But this is something that I want to continue to explain and continue to, extrapolate on. This is what I preach on. When we talk about the sanctity of life, you cannot get away from the murder of babies that's happening. So if you're preaching on this, let's say you're preaching on the goodness of life, about how we should obey God, how can you get away from preaching against abortion?
Right.
Unless you purposely don't. And I think that's a coward's way out. You got to do it. And so you got to do it as a pastor. I'm talking to myself as a pastor. I have to do it. But even as a Christian, you should be able to say, this is bad, and I will not have it. I will not stand for it.
Thank you for that, Pastor Eugene. And we hope and pray that your Thanksgiving week and Thanksgiving weekend and Thanksgiving Day would be a pleasant one, filled with gratitude and thanksgiving, because that is the point of this holiday. And so we hope you have a great, great Thanksgiving. And thank you for listening to this episode of the Dear Church podcast. We will be continuing on our series on ecclesiology, which I hope has been interesting. If it hasn't been interesting, just let me know. Just give me like a wink or something when I see you. Just
even if it has been, why don't you just tell him
that it hasn't
been, just to give him a hard time?
No, yeah. If it hasn't been interesting,
then he won't be able to sleep.
Just tell me, like, I hate this episode. I hate this podcast. Just tell me. But we will be discussing ruling elders next week. It's a continuation of our Elders podcast. We hope and pray that this has been a blessing in your ears. Fight the good fight. Finish the race. Keep the faith.
Peace.